In feudal Japan, there was a protocol called mokusatsu, to kill with silence. When a samurai received a challenge or an insult, the most powerful response available to him was not a counter-argument or a drawn sword. It was to say nothing, to treat the provocation as if it had not occurred. This wasn't passivity. It was a strategic communication that said, "Your words did not reach a level that requires my response." The silence itself was the verdict, and it carried more authority than any rebuttal ever could, because it demonstrated something an explanation never can, that the other person's opinion had no operational weight on your life. Most people live the opposite of this. They explain constantly, not because anyone asked, but because somewhere deep in the architecture of how they learn to exist around other people, they were taught that an unexplained decision is a dangerous one. That silence after a choice is the same as guilt. That if you don't offer your reasoning, people will assume the worst, and that assumption will cost you something you can't afford to lose. So you explain, you pre-explain, you explain things that haven't been questioned yet, just in case. And none of it makes you more understood. It makes you more available for negotiation. Schopenhauer described a version of this when he wrote about the way most people form their convictions, not through internal examination, but through the anxiety of standing alone. He argued that the majority of human opinions are not arrived at by thinking, but by belonging. People adopt the positions of their group, and they defend those positions not because they believe them deeply, but because abandoning them would mean tolerating the discomfort of separation. The same principle drives over-explanation. You don't explain yourself because you think the other person needs to understand your reasoning. You explain yourself because their confusion feels like a withdrawal of belonging, and that withdrawal activates something in you that is older and louder than logic. This is why over-explaining never works the way you think it will. You offer a reason, hoping it will close the gap between your decision and their approval. But what actually happens is that the explanation opens a door. It signals that your choice is still in draft, that there's a comment section, that the right counter-argument might change your mind, because if it couldn't, why would you be explaining? The people around you pick up on this instantly, even if they can't articulate it. An explained decision feels provisional. An unexplained decision feels final. And finality is what earns respect, not transparency. There's something underneath this that most people never examine. The compulsion to explain yourself is almost never about communication. It's about an old fracture in self-trust that learned to disguise itself as good manners. At some point, usually early, usually in a household where your emotions were treated as inconvenient, or your choices were regularly overruled, you learned that the way to keep yourself safe was to make yourself legible, to preemptively answer every possible objection before it arrived, to build a case for your own existence so airtight that no one could dismiss it. That habit followed you out of the house and into your adult life, and now it runs underneath everything: your relationships, your career, the way you hold a boundary or fail to hold one. You think you're being considerate. You're actually being compliant. And the difference between those two things is the distance between a person who is respected and a person who is managed. Schopenhauer spent decades largely alone, not because he couldn't function socially, but because he understood the cost of performing for approval. He wrote that solitude is the fate of all exceptional minds, not as a boast, but as an observation about what happens when you stop calibrating your inner life to the comfort of your audience. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you stop being legible to people who only understood the version of you that came with footnotes. Some of them will leave. The ones who stay are the only ones who were actually there for you, rather than for the access your explanations gave them. Here's what changes practically when you stop. First, your decisions get faster. Most of the time you spend deliberating isn't actually deliberation. It's rehearsing the explanation you'll need to give afterward. You're not weighing the choice. You're weighing how the choice will sound when you defend it to someone whose approval you've decided you need. Remove the audience, and the decision often makes itself in seconds because you already knew what you wanted before you started building a case for it. The hesitation was never about the decision, it was about the performance that came after. Second, you find out which relationships are built on respect and which ones are built on access. The people who genuinely care about you will adjust to your silence. They might be confused at first. They might even ask if something is wrong, but they'll adapt because the relationship was never contingent on you making yourself legible to them on demand. The people who push back, who escalate, who frame your silence as hostility or your boundaries as betrayal, those are the people whose comfort depended on your compliance. You weren't a person to them. You were a supply line. And now you know. Third, and this is the one that changes everything quietly, you start hearing your own mind again. Schopenhauer argued that most people never access their own thoughts because they are perpetually drowning in the noise of other people's opinions. He called this the tragedy of intellectual dependence, the way a person can go through an entire life thinking borrowed thoughts and defending positions they never actually chose. When you stop explaining, you stop rehearsing. When you stop rehearsing, the internal monologue quiets down. And in that quiet, something emerges that you may not have heard clearly in years, your actual position. Not the polished, pre-approved, audience-tested version you've been running past other people for validation. The raw one. The one that doesn't need a defense because it isn't performing for anyone. The samurai who practiced mokusatsu weren't pretending the insult didn't land. They were demonstrating that their sense of self operated on a frequency the insult couldn't reach. That's not arrogance. That's architecture. It's what a person looks like when they've built their identity on something sturdier than other people's reactions. You've been handing people the blueprints to your inner life every time you explain a decision they didn't ask about. Not because they needed it, because you were afraid of what would happen if you didn't. And the answer is, what happens is that you find out who you are when you're not performing for the room. That version of you is quieter, less accommodating, less available for other people's commentary, and more solid than anything you've ever built on the back of an explanation. That version has been there the entire time, underneath the disclaimers and the justifications and the constant narration of your own choices. It's been waiting for you to stop talking long enough to let it exist. The next time you feel the pull to justify a choice you've already made, notice the pull itself. Don't fight it. Don't suppress it. Just notice where it comes from. That sensation is not clarity looking for expression. It's an old habit asking you to keep it alive, an ancient agreement you made with someone who is probably no longer even in the room. Let it sit there. Let it go unanswered. And watch what fills the space when you stop filling it yourself.